The weight of it all, you know the feeling, that desperate, quiet struggle to keep all the pieces in place, the perfect facade at work, the calm demeanor with family, the inner peace you're supposed to cultivate. It's a constant, exhausting effort, isn't it? Like trying to hold water in your cupped hands. The harder you squeeze, the more it slips through your fingers. This striving, this need to project an image of a stable, put-together self, is a burden we carry every day. We build our identities like sturdy houses, brick by brick, with carefully chosen words and calculated actions, hoping they'll withstand the storms of life. But what if the very foundation of these houses is built on sand? Imagine a monk, adrift in the vastness of his spiritual path. He had renounced everything, his possessions, his family, his former life, seeking ultimate truth. Yet, in the quiet solitude of his practice, he found himself haunted by something he couldn't quite grasp. It was the ghost of the self he thought he had left behind, a persistent whisper in the stillness, reminding him of who he used to be. He meditated on it, analyzed it, and prayed for its eradication. But the more he fought this phantom self, the stronger it seemed to become. It was a paradox that gnawed at his peace. How could he find liberation if this persistent sense of me refused to dissolve? One day, through a moment of profound stillness, a realization dawned. It wasn't about banishing the self, but about understanding its true nature. The self he was wrestling with, the one born of memories, desires, and fears, was like a mirage on the horizon, always visible, always beckoning, but never truly there to be held. The story of this monk, and the wisdom he eventually uncovered, points to a profound truth. The self that we so desperately try to hold together, the self that craves stability and permanence, is not real. It is a construct, a narrative woven from threads of the past and projections of the future. When we cling to this fabricated self, we create an internal battleground. We defend it, polish it, worry about its reputation. We invest so much energy into maintaining this illusion that we lose touch with the vibrant, ever-changing reality of our true being. It's as if we are so busy guarding a beautiful painting that we fail to notice the breathtaking landscape outside our window. This constant effort to present a fixed self is the source of so much quiet desperation. It's the fear of being exposed, of being found wanting, of our carefully constructed identity crumbling. But what if the crumbling is not the end, but the beginning of something far more authentic? The Buddha pointed to this very illusion, teaching that the self we believe ourselves to be is not an unchanging entity, but a dynamic process. It is like a river, constantly flowing, never the same from one moment to the next. Yet we try to dam this river, to freeze its flow, to capture a single drop and call it me. This is why the past cannot hold you, but if the past has no weight, what about the constant stream of thoughts in the present? In the next section, we'll see why the Buddha taught that thoughts are like clouds, always drifting, and that our identity is not a truth, but a reaction. And before we dive deeper into these teachings, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Wisdom like this is easy to miss in the noise of life, but if this video found you, it was meant to. Now let's keep going. The deeply ingrained habit of trying to hold it together, that relentless effort to maintain a consistent, stable sense of self, is the very thing that prevents us from experiencing true peace. We believe that our worth and security lie in this perceived permanence, in the idea that there is a solid me at the core of our being, a self that can be reliably counted on. This belief is so pervasive that it shapes our every action. We curate our personalities, edit our histories, and strategize our futures, all in service of this imagined, unshakable self. It's like a sculptor chiseling away at a block of marble, convinced they are revealing a flawless statue, unaware that the marble itself is always in flux, shifting with the slightest change in temperature or pressure. Think about the moments you felt most anxious or insecure. Often, these feelings arise when this constructed self feels threatened. Perhaps someone criticized your work, or you made a mistake that dented your carefully crafted image of competence. In those moments, The self you've worked so hard to build feels attacked, and the immediate reaction is to defend it, to shore up its flimsy defenses. But this defense is an uphill battle. The self we try to hold together is, in fact, an illusion. It's a collection of memories, habits, beliefs, and perceptions that are constantly changing. If you trace the origins of any defining characteristic, any strong belief you hold, you'll find it's a product of past experiences, social conditioning, and immediate circumstances. It's more like a story you tell yourself than a solid entity. Consider the monk again. In his pursuit of detachment, he realized that the self he was trying to relinquish was a phantom, an invention. It wasn't a real, tangible thing that could be discarded like an old coat. It was a complex web of conditioning, a narrative that had become so ingrained it felt like reality. The Buddha's teaching on anatman, often translated as no self, doesn't mean that we don't exist. It means that there is no permanent, unchanging, independent self as we commonly imagine. There is no core me that is separate from the ever-changing stream of physical and mental phenomena. This realization can be unsettling. It challenges our most fundamental sense of identity. If there's no solid me, then who is it that experiences joy? Who is it that suffers? Who is it that is reading these words right now? The answer lies not in finding a fixed point, but in recognizing the dynamic nature of experience. The I that experiences joy is the same process that experiences sadness, that thinks thoughts, that feels sensations. It's a continuum, a flowing river of awareness. When we try to solidify this river, to create a permanent island within it, we inevitably create suffering. We grasp at fleeting moments of happiness, trying to make them last. We recoil from pain, desperate to preserve our idealized self. This clinging, this effort to make the impermanent permanent, is the root of our struggle. The monk understood that the self he tried to hold together was precisely the self that bound him. It was a prison built from his own mind, reinforced by every attempt to solidify his identity. True freedom, he discovered, was not in strengthening the walls of this prison, but in realizing there were no walls at all. The paradox is profound. The self that can be held together with effort and will is a mere construct, an illusion that binds us. It is by fully seeing its impermanent, fluid nature, by allowing the illusion of a solid self to dissolve, that we meet something far more real and liberating. The stability you seek is not found in reinforcing the self, but in understanding its true, fluid nature. Yet if this self is not fixed, then how do we even begin to understand our place in the world? In the next section, we'll explore how our sense of identity is not a truth, but a reaction to our experiences. Our sense of who we are, this intricate tapestry of beliefs, memories, and social roles we call identity, feels like the most fundamental aspect of our existence. We protect it, nurture it, and often define ourselves by it. But what if this identity is not an inherent truth, but a continuous reaction to the world around us and the landscapes within us? Think about how easily our sense of self can shift. One day you might feel like a confident, capable professional. The next, after a perceived failure or criticism, you might feel like an imposter, riddled with doubt. This dramatic flip doesn't mean you've fundamentally changed as a person. It means your reaction to an event has altered your perception of yourself. The Buddha taught that identity is a process, a constantly unfolding story rather than a finished book. It is built not from stone, but from the fleeting impressions that arise moment by moment. Each thought, each sensation, each interaction is a thread, and our mind weaves these threads into a narrative of who we are. But the weaver is always busy, and the pattern is always changing. Consider the example of the monk who was so attached to his renunciation. His identity as a monk was initially a reaction to his past life and a response to his spiritual aspirations. But as he meditated, he realized that even this identity, however noble, was a construct. It was a label, a role that his mind reacted to. The mind is a reactive organ. It observes, it interprets, it categorizes. When we encounter something new, or when something challenges our existing framework, the mind reacts. It tries to fit the new experience into a known pattern, and in doing so, it reinforces or alters our sense of self. For instance, when we receive praise, our mind reacts by associating it with positive qualities we believe we possess, strengthening our sense of competence. Conversely, when we face criticism, our mind reacts by highlighting perceived flaws, reinforcing a sense of inadequacy. Neither reaction is a definitive truth about our being. They are simply the mind's immediate responses. This is why clinging to a fixed identity is so problematic. We believe it to be a stable anchor, but it's actually a kite being buffeted by the winds of experience. When the winds blow favorably, we feel good about ourselves. When they turn harsh, we feel shattered. But the kite itself is just a flimsy piece of paper animated by the breeze. The practice of mindfulness helps us observe these reactions without immediately identifying with them. When a thought arises, "I am not good enough," mindfulness invites us to see it not as an absolute truth, but as a passing thought, a reaction from the mind. It's like watching a cloud drift across the sky, rather than believing you are the cloud. This understanding is not about diminishing our sense of self, but about freeing it from the unnecessary burden of permanence. If identity is a reaction, then we are not trapped by who we think we are. We have the capacity to respond differently to our experiences. We can learn to observe the mind's reactions without being swept away by them. This is a radical shift in perspective. Instead of seeing ourselves as fixed entities, we begin to see ourselves as dynamic processes, always capable of unfolding in new ways. The self becomes less of a noun and more of a verb, a continuous state of becoming, shaped by our present awareness rather than dictated by past reactions. The profound implication of this is that the suffering we experience is often a result of clinging to these reactive identities, fighting to maintain a narrative that is no longer serving us or is simply not true. As we see that our sense of identity is not a fixed truth, but a series of reactions, we begin to understand the nature of our discontent. But if our identity is a reaction, then where does our suffering truly originate? In the next section, we'll delve into how suffering grows in the gap between who we are and who we pretend to be, revealing the illusion we maintain. We spend so much of our lives in a delicate dance between these two realities. The person we actually are in any given moment, and the person we believe we should be, or the person we present to the world. This gap, this space of pretense, is fertile ground for suffering to take root and flourish. Imagine someone who, beneath a veneer of confidence and success, harbors deep insecurities. They might meticulously craft an image of competence, always having the right answers, always appearing in control. But inwardly, a constant stream of worry whispers, "What if they find out? What if they see through me?" This internal dialogue, this chasm between their outward projection and their inner reality, is a source of immense psychological pain. The pretense is an exhausting performance. It requires constant vigilance, a relentless effort to ensure that the mask never slips. It's like holding your breath for extended periods. Eventually, the strain becomes unbearable. This effort to maintain a false self drains our energy, dims our spirit, and creates an inner tension that can manifest as anxiety, depression, and various forms of emotional distress. The monk, in his spiritual quest, encountered this very gap. He had shed his worldly possessions and social standing, aiming for a pure, detached existence. Yet he carried with him the mental habit of being a certain kind of monk, a wise, serene, liberated being. When moments of doubt, anger, or simple human frailty arose, they felt like betrayals of this ideal self, widening the chasm between who he thought he was supposed to be and what was actually unfolding within him. This gap is not just about pretending to be better than we are. It also encompasses the fear of acknowledging our true feelings, our genuine desires, or our perceived flaws. If we pretend we are not hurt by unkind words, or that we don't crave connection, or that we don't struggle with certain urges, we create a disconnect within ourselves. This internal division is where suffering festers. The practice of mindfulness, of bringing gentle awareness to our present experience, is a direct confrontation with this gap. It asks us to notice without judgment, what is actually happening right now? What am I feeling? What am I thinking? By observing our true state, even the parts we find uncomfortable, we begin to shrink the space between who we are and who we pretend to be. When we allow ourselves to be imperfect, to be caught in moments of confusion or sadness, we honor our full humanity. This acceptance, this willingness to be seen as we are, begins to dissolve the pretense. And as the pretense dissolves, so does the suffering it generates. The struggle to maintain the facade requires immense energy that could otherwise be used for genuine peace and connection. It's like trying to balance a stack of plates on a wobbly table. You're constantly adjusting, always on the verge of collapse. The peace comes when you stop trying to balance the plates and simply let them rest where they naturally fall. The mind, in its effort to protect us, creates these illusions of self. It believes that by pretending to be something we are not, we will be safer or more loved. But paradoxically, this pretense isolates us, both from ourselves and from others. True connection, true peace, arises from authenticity, from the courage to be transparent about our inner world. The monk's journey wasn't about achieving a perfect, unblemished state of being. It was about understanding that the striving for such a state, the pretense of already having arrived, was the very obstacle. His suffering diminished as he began to accept the totality of his experience, the light and the shadow, the calm and the storm, without needing to pretend he was anything other than what he was in that moment. So let us look at this gap within ourselves. Where are we pretending? Where are we showing a version of ourselves that isn't quite real, fearing that the true self is not enough? Recognizing this pretense is the first step toward genuine freedom, but understanding the root of our fear is crucial. In the next section, we will explore how our attachment to this idea of me is the true source of our deepest fears. Fear is a primal human experience, a signal of danger, a survival mechanism. But the constant, gnawing anxieties that plague our modern lives often stem not from immediate threats, but from a deeper, more pervasive source. Our attachment to the idea of a fixed, enduring self, to me. This me is a story we tell ourselves, a narrative woven from our past experiences, our hopes, our desires, and our social conditioning. We cling to this narrative as if it were our very being, a solid, dependable entity that must be protected at all costs. It is this very clinging, this fierce identification with me, that breeds all sorts of fears. Fear of judgment. If I am my reputation, then criticism or disapproval becomes a direct assault on my existence. The fear of what others think is the fear that they will see through the illusion of me, and then what would be left? Fear of loss. If I am my possessions, my relationships, my status, then the prospect of losing them is terrifying. It feels like losing a part of myself, a diminishment of my being. Fear of change. If I am a stable entity, then any change, whether it's aging, illness, or simply the passage of time, feels like a threat to my permanence. The idea that I will cease to be as I am is deeply unsettling. The monk, in his unwavering practice, wrestled with this attachment. He renounced worldly possessions, but the attachment to his spiritual identity, his me as a devoted seeker, remained. The fear that he might fail, that he might not achieve enlightenment, that the me he was cultivating might ultimately be revealed as flawed, was a persistent undercurrent. This attachment to me is not about actively wanting to be afraid. It is a subtle, often unconscious process of identifying our well-being with the continuation and preservation of this constructed self. When me is threatened, we feel fear. When me is affirmed, we feel relief. The Buddha's teachings on impermanence and no-self are direct antidotes to this fear. They invite us to loosen our grip on the idea of a solid, independent me. They reveal that the me we cling to is, in fact, a constantly changing phenomenon, much like a flame that appears continuous, but is in reality a series of moments of combustion. If we can begin to see that me is not a static entity, but a flowing process, then the threats to it become less existentially terrifying. A criticism is not an attack on the core of my being, but a reaction to a particular configuration of thoughts and feelings at a certain moment. Loss is not the annihilation of me, but the impermanent nature of phenomena manifesting. This is not to say that fear vanishes overnight. Our conditioning runs deep. But by understanding that attachment to me is the root, we can begin to address the source. When fear arises, instead of immediately reacting and reinforcing the me narrative, we can pause and inquire, who is afraid? What is this me that feels threatened? This inquiry is not meant to be intellectual. It is a contemplative practice, a gentle turning of attention inward. It is about observing the fear and the object of fear without getting lost in the story of me and my predicament. The monk's breakthrough came when he stopped trying to protect his spiritual me, and instead allowed himself to be fully present with whatever arose, even the fear of his own spiritual inadequacy. He realized that the very act of protecting me was the source of his torment. The illusion of a fixed me is the bedrock upon which our fears are built. When we finally see that this bedrock is an illusion, the entire edifice of fear begins to crumble, not through forceful demolition, but through the quiet dawning of a more profound understanding. The attachment to me is the source of our deepest fears, but what if the very thing we fear more than anything is the absence of permanence itself? In the next section, we will explore how impermanence isn't a threat, but a doorway to understanding. Impermanence isn't a threat, it's a doorway. The very word impermanence can send a shiver down the spine. It conjures images of decay, loss, and the ultimate dissolution of everything we hold dear. We are conditioned to seek stability, to build our lives on foundations that appear solid, and the notion that everything is constantly changing can feel like a direct threat to our security. This fear of impermanence is deeply embedded in our psyche. We dread the aging of our bodies, the fading of our youth, the inevitable departure of loved ones. We grasp at moments of happiness, desperately trying to prolong them, only to be met with the sorrow of their passing. Our entire existence can feel like a wrestling match against the relentless flow of time. Consider the monk's struggle. He sought liberation, a state of being free from suffering. Yet he was still tethered to the fear that his spiritual progress might be lost, that the enlightenment he sought might not be permanent, or that his very self might cease to exist. This fear of impermanence was a subtle but powerful chain. The Buddha, however, presented a radical reframe. Impermanence is not an enemy to be fought, but a fundamental truth to be understood. It is not a threat, but a doorway. When we resist impermanence, we resist reality. But when we open ourselves to it, we unlock a profound freedom. Think of a river. It is constantly flowing, its waters never the same from one moment to the next. Would we say the river is threatened by its own flow? No, its very nature is its flow. Similarly, our lives are a continuous stream of moments, each arising and passing away. To resist this is like trying to stop the tide. When we cling to things, to relationships, to possessions, to our physical health, even to our ideas of ourselves, we are attempting to freeze the unfreezable. This clinging inevitably leads to suffering, because impermanence will always have the last word. The greater our attachment, the greater our pain when the inevitable change occurs. But what happens when we embrace impermanence? Firstly, our capacity for appreciation deepens. When we truly understand that a moment of joy, a loved one's presence, a beautiful sunset, are all transient, we tend to savor them more fully. We are present with them, cherishing their fleeting beauty rather than taking them for granted or desperately trying to capture them. Secondly, our resilience grows. If we know that difficulties, pain, and sadness are also impermanent, we can face them with more courage and less despair. We understand that this too shall pass, not as a platitude, but as a fundamental certainty. This shifts our relationship with struggle from one of resistance to one of endurance and learning. Thirdly, and most importantly, embracing impermanence loosens our grip on the illusion of a fixed self. If everything is changing, then the me we cling to is also a part of this ceaseless flux. This realization is liberating because it frees us from the burden of maintaining a static identity. The monk's journey revealed this truth. He fought against the impermanence of his own passing thoughts and emotions, trying to mold himself into a perfect spiritual being. But when he finally surrendered to the natural ebb and flow of his mind, he found not annihilation, but a vast, unburdened space of awareness. Impermanence is the very nature of existence. To deny it is to live in a state of perpetual delusion and fear. To accept it is to align ourselves with reality, and in that alignment, we find not destruction, but an opening to a deeper, more profound sense of peace and freedom. It's like a gardener who understands that seasons change. They don't mourn the falling leaves, but prepare for the new growth. The recognition of impermanence is not an endpoint, but a gateway. It cracks open the door to a different way of being. But if impermanence is the truth of existence, why does our mind resist it so fiercely, seeking refuge in distraction and noise? In the next section, we will explore how the mind will do anything to avoid silence, revealing its deep aversion to facing reality. Silence. For some, it's golden. For others, it's a vast, unsettling void. Our minds, conditioned to constant engagement, often react to silence not as a space of peace, but as an empty arena where uncomfortable truths might arise. The mind, in its tireless effort to maintain the illusion of a solid self and avoid the stark reality of impermanence, will employ an arsenal of distractions to avoid true silence. Think about the moments you've found yourself reaching for your phone, even when you have nothing specific to check, or the sudden urge to clean, to organize, to engage in any mundane task when faced with a quiet moment of inactivity. These are not random impulses. They are the mind's defense mechanisms desperately trying to fill the void. The monk, in his early days of rigorous meditation, experienced this firsthand. The meditation cushion, intended to be a sanctuary, often transformed into a battleground. As the external distractions faded, the internal ones flared up with ferocious intensity. Thoughts would rush in, memories would resurface, anxieties would churn, all clamoring for attention, anything to avoid the stillness that threatened to reveal what lay beneath the surface. This aversion to silence is a sign of a deeper aversion. The aversion to facing oneself without the comforting buffers of distraction. In silence, the constant hum of mental activity quiets down, and the raw material of our experience, our worries, our regrets, our unfulfilled desires, begin to surface. The mind, having built a complex edifice of identity and busyness around itself, fears that in silence, this edifice will crumble, revealing an emptiness it's not prepared to confront. The mind creates a constant stream of internal chatter, planning, judging, reminiscing, worrying. This internal monologue acts as a veil, obscuring the deeper reality of our existence. It's like being in a room with a loud radio playing. You can't hear the subtle sounds of the world outside. The mind insists on keeping the radio on, at full blast, at all times. The very act of seeking silence can trigger this mental resistance. As you begin to quiet your mind, the mental noise often intensifies, a last-ditch effort to pull you back into the familiar domain of thought and distraction. It's like trying to quiet a frantic child. The more you try to calm them, the louder they may become for a short while. This strategy of avoidance is deeply ingrained. We are taught from a young age that being busy is good, that idleness is a waste of time. We are bombarded with external stimuli, making it seem normal to constantly be engaged, entertained, or occupied. The idea of simply being can feel foreign and uncomfortable. But what is the mind avoiding? It's avoiding the truth of impermanence, the illusion of a fixed self, and the potential emptiness that lies beneath our constructed identities. In silence, we are faced with the raw, unedited reality of our existence, stripped of our usual defenses and distractions. This can be confronting, as it brings us face to face with our own vulnerability and the impermanent nature of all things. The monk's path involved a deliberate and courageous engagement with this internal resistance. He learned that the noise the mind generated was not an insurmountable barrier, but a signpost pointing towards what he needed to examine. By gently returning his attention to his breath or a meditation object, even amidst the mental chaos, he gradually began to weaken his mind's grip on its own distractions. The key is not to fight the mind's attempts to distract itself, but to observe them with a curious and compassionate awareness. Recognize the impulse to escape, acknowledge the thoughts as they arise, and then gently, consistently guide your attention back to a point of anchor, whether it's the breath, a sensation, or the present moment itself. This practice weakens the mind's addiction to distraction. It shows the mind that silence isn't an empty abyss, but a space where clarity and peace can eventually emerge. It's like clearing away the debris from a well. The water beneath is still there, waiting to be accessed. The mind's desperate bid to avoid silence is a signal that we are on the verge of something transformative. But if the mind shies away from emptiness, what does this mean for our personal desires and aspirations, especially the deep-seated one to be special or unique? In the next section, we'll explore how even the desire to be special is a form of suffering. The desire to be special, to stand out, to be unique and acknowledged for it, is a powerful human drive. From childhood, we are often praised for being bright, talented, or gifted. This conditioning can instill a deep-seated belief that our worth is tied to our exceptionalism, and that to be ordinary is to be invisible or worse, a failure. This aspiration for specialness, however, seems to lead us in circles. When we achieve a level of recognition, we fear losing it. We become anxious about maintaining our unique status, constantly comparing ourselves to others and seeking new ways to prove our exceptionalism. This relentless pursuit is not a path to lasting happiness, but a continuous cycle of striving and anxiety, which is, in essence, suffering. The monk, despite his renunciation of worldly achievements, wrestled with this subtle form of attachment. He might have been exceptional in his devotion, his discipline, his insights, but the underlying desire to believe he was special among the renounced, that his spiritual path was more profound or his dedication more pure, could easily arise. His suffering was renewed not by worldly loss, but by this subtle clinging to a spiritual me that was somehow set apart. This desire for specialness is a deeply ingrained aspect of the ego's self-narrative. The ego thrives on differentiation, on being more than or less than others. It seeks validation through external markers of superiority or uniqueness. When this validation is attained, it provides only temporary relief, like a fleeting sensation of warmth on a cold day. The suffering arises from the constant comparison and the fear of losing this perceived specialness. If I am special because of my intelligence, I must constantly perform intellectually. If I am special because of my artistic talent, I must continually create masterpieces. The pressure to maintain this special status is immense and exhausting. This drive is also inherently unstable. What makes one special today might be commonplace tomorrow, or surpassed by someone else. The ground beneath this desire is constantly shifting, making it a precarious foundation for happiness. When the external validation fades, or when we encounter someone who is seemingly more special, the suffering intensifies. The Buddha's teachings on emptiness and interdependence offer a different perspective. They suggest that true worth is not found in being set apart, but in recognizing our inherent connection to all things. When we understand that we are all part of the same vast web of existence, the need to be special in opposition to others begins to dissolve. This is not to say we should suppress our talents or disregard our unique qualities. Rather, it is about shifting the motivation. Instead of seeking specialness for the ego's satisfaction, we can engage our abilities with a spirit of service, of contribution, or simply for the joy of the activity itself. free from the need for external validation. The practice, then, is to observe this desire for specialness when it arises. Notice the subtle judgments, the comparisons, the inner narrative that seeks to elevate me. Gently acknowledge this impulse without self-recrimination. See it as a conditioned pattern, a habit of the mind that promises fulfillment but delivers only temporary highs followed by lows. When the monk recognized this subtle desire within himself, he didn't try to forcibly eliminate it. Instead, he saw it for what it was, another manifestation of attachment, another way the ego sought to solidify its existence. By observing it without judgment, he began to loosen its grip. The recognition that even the desire to be special is a form of suffering can be a profound revelation. It suggests that lasting peace doesn't come from achieving a superior status, but from cultivating a deep acceptance of our ordinary, interconnected existence. It's about finding freedom not in being extraordinary, but in being authentically present. But if even our deepest desires are tangled with suffering, how do we begin to untangle them and find genuine liberation? In the next section, we will confront the idea that perhaps the truth we seek doesn't require our readiness. The truth doesn't need you to be ready. There's a common impulse when confronted with profound wisdom or challenging truths. The urge to prepare for them. We think, I need to be stronger, calmer, more enlightened, then I'll be ready to truly understand this. Whether it's the truth of suffering, impermanence, or emptiness, we often defer acceptance, believing our current state of unpreparedness is a barrier. This waiting game, however, is a subtle form of resistance. The truth, the fundamental reality of existence, does not operate on our schedule. It simply is. It doesn't wait for us to graduate from our anxieties or perfect our composure. It unfolds whether we are ready or not. Imagine a seed waiting for the sun. The sun doesn't ask if the seed is ready before it shines. The monk, in his dedicated practice, might have felt he wasn't ready for the full implications of emptiness. He might have believed that his current level of spiritual development was insufficient to grasp such a profound concept without being overwhelmed. This feeling of unpreparedness could have kept him stalled, caught between the desire for liberation and the fear of its radical implications. Our feeling of unpreparedness often stems from the ego's desire for control. We want to manage the implications of truth, to integrate it on our own terms, in a way that doesn't disrupt our comfort zone too drastically. We want to be able to handle the insights without feeling too much discomfort or change. But the nature of truth, particularly the truths of the Dharma, is that they often challenge our most deeply held assumptions. They are meant to shake us, to awaken us, not to fit neatly into our pre-existing frameworks. To wait for readiness is to postpone the very awakening that the truth offers. Consider the truth of impermanence. You don't need to be ready to accept that things change. It's happening right now, in your body, in your environment, in your thoughts. The recognition of this truth doesn't require a special state of being. It simply requires us to look, to observe without distortion. The danger of waiting is that it creates a cycle of procrastination. We keep putting off the integration of these truths, telling ourselves that tomorrow or next year we'll be better equipped. Meanwhile, the suffering that these truths could alleviate continues to persist. This is not about forcing ourselves to accept something we cannot comprehend. It is about cultivating a willingness to engage with what is, even when it feels uncomfortable or overwhelming. It is about lowering our defenses and allowing reality to reveal itself, rather than trying to control its revelation. The truth doesn't need us to be masters of meditation or perfectly virtuous individuals or free from all doubt. It simply needs us to be present, open, and willing to observe. Even the smallest crack in our resistance, the slightest willingness to consider a different perspective, is enough for the truth to begin to dawn. The monk's eventual realization came not because he suddenly felt ready, but because he reached a point where the internal pressure of his seeking outweighed his perceived unreadiness. He had to step into the unknown, trusting that the Dharma itself would guide him, rather than relying on his own subjective assessment of his preparedness. The truth is like a mirror. It will show you what is there, regardless of whether you feel ready for the reflection. Your readiness doesn't change the reflection, it only changes how you feel about what you see. So perhaps the most important step is not to become ready, but to simply look at what is already before you. The truth doesn't need our readiness, revealing that our perceived unpreparedness is often an excuse. But what does this truth, this reality that is always present, truly reveal when we finally stop resisting it? In the next section, we will explore how emptiness, often misunderstood as nothingness, feels painful at first, but ultimately leads to profound freedom. The concept of emptiness, or shunyata in Sanskrit, is one of the most profound and often misunderstood teachings in Buddhism. For many, the word emptiness conjures images of a desolate void, a terrifying nothingness that swallows all meaning and purpose. This initial reaction, this visceral fear of emptiness, is completely understandable. When we first start to glimpse the truth of emptiness, it can feel like the ground is falling out from beneath us. We are so accustomed to identifying with a solid, separate self, with our possessions, our relationships, our achievements, all the things we believe give our lives substance and meaning. To realize that these things are, in their ultimate nature, empty of inherent, independent existence can feel like a profound loss. Imagine the monk. He had shed his worldly life, believing he was moving towards a state of fullness and truth. But as he meditated deeper, he began to see the impermanent, interdependent nature of all phenomena, including his own sense of self. This initial realization of emptiness wasn't a sudden rush of peace. It was a bewildering, even painful, confrontation with the lack of solidity he had always assumed. The very sense of me that he was trying to perfect now seemed to dissolve, leaving him feeling adrift, disconnected. This initial pain stems from our deep-seated attachment to conventional reality. We love the solidity of things, the sense of having a permanent me to rely on. When the illusion of this solidity begins to crack, it triggers our primal fears of annihilation, of meaninglessness. We equate emptiness with loss of self, loss of control, and loss of purpose. The suffering arises from our interpretation of emptiness. We see it as an absence, a lack, a deficit. We imagine that if there is no inherent self, then there is no one to experience anything, no one to love, no one to strive for. This interpretation, rooted in our conditioned dualistic thinking, leads to fear and resistance. However, this is only the first stage of encountering emptiness. As we continue to practice, to observe with more wisdom and less fear, the nature of emptiness begins to reveal itself differently. It's not a terrifying void, but a space of potential, a condition for all existence. If all phenomena are empty of inherent existence, it means they are not fixed, not static. This lack of inherent existence is precisely what allows things to arise, to change, and to interact. It is the condition for life, for love, for compassion, for clarity. Without emptiness, nothing could ever come into being or pass away. The monk, after his initial disorientation, began to see this. He realized that the emptiness he was perceiving was not about non-existence, but about interconnectedness. His self was not annihilated, but was revealed to be a dynamic interplay of causes and conditions, inseparable from the rest of existence. This realization didn't leave him with a void, but with a sense of boundless freedom. When we see emptiness not as a lack, but as a spaciousness, our limitations begin to fall away. The rigid boundaries we've constructed around ourselves dissolve. The fear of loss diminishes because we understand that what we perceive as loss is merely a transformation. We are free from the burden of upholding a false, solid self. This transition from pain to freedom is gradual. It requires courage, persistence, and a willingness to confront our deepest fears. It involves seeing that the solidity we crave is actually a cage, and that the emptiness we initially dread is actually the open sky. The painful stage is the dismantling of our illusions. The freeing stage is the realization that in the absence of these illusions, authentic existence can finally flourish. It's like a sculptor who, after removing the excess stone, finds the true form emerging, not from nothingness, but from the inherent potential of the material. Emptiness is not a nihilistic concept. It is a radical opening, a doorway to understanding the interconnected, dynamic nature of all reality. While it may feel like a painful dissolution at first, this dismantling of our illusions is the necessary prelude to experiencing a freedom we could never have imagined. The realization of emptiness is a profound shift, but what does it mean in practical terms for our daily lives, especially for the individual who feels defined by their experiences and life story? In the next section, we will explore a critical teaching. The Buddha did not teach self-improvement. The modern world is saturated with an ethos of self-improvement. From books and seminars to apps and therapies, we are constantly encouraged to become better versions of ourselves, more productive, more successful, more mindful, more loving. This relentless striving to enhance and perfect the self is so pervasive that it can even infiltrate our understanding of spiritual practice. However, a careful examination of the Buddha's teachings reveals something quite different. The Buddha did not teach self-improvement in the way we commonly understand it. His aim was not to polish the existing self, but to dismantle the very notion of a fixed, independent self that is worthy of improvement. Consider the monk. If his goal was self-improvement, he might focus on meditating longer, reciting scriptures more diligently, or cultivating more profound states of equanimity. These might be seen as improvements to his spiritual self. But the Buddha's teachings pointed beyond this. They encouraged the monk to examine the very nature of the self that was striving for improvement. The core of the Buddha's message lies in understanding impermanence and no self. If there is no fixed, permanent self, then what exactly is being improved? The self we try to improve is, as we've seen, a constantly shifting collection of thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. Trying to improve this ever-changing phenomenon is like trying to polish a cloud. The true aim of the Dharma is not to make a better self, but to awaken to the truth of our being, which is already beyond the limitations of self. It's about seeing through the illusion of a separate, solid self and recognizing our inherent interconnectedness and the empty nature of phenomena. This awakening is not an act of self-enhancement, but a radical shift in perspective. The suffering that the Buddha sought to alleviate arises from attachment to the concept of self and the relentless cycle of striving and dissatisfaction that this attachment breeds. Self-improvement, in its conventional sense, often reinforces this attachment. It assumes there is a fundamentally flawed self that needs to be fixed, rather than a mistaken view of self that needs to be seen through. The Buddha's path is one of seeing, understanding, and letting go, not of building up or perfecting. It is about recognizing that our true nature is not flawed and in need of improvement, but is inherently free, luminous, and perfect in its very emptiness. The flaws we perceive are distortions created by our misapprehension of self. This distinction is crucial. If we approach Buddhist practice with a self-improvement mindset, we can inadvertently deepen our attachment to me and turn the path into another form of striving and potential disappointment. We might feel discouraged if we don't see progress in our spiritual self, mistaking the absence of further clinging for a lack of spiritual advancement. The monk's journey was not about becoming a better monk, but about realizing what it truly meant to be free from the constraints of his own mind. His practice was about seeing the illusion of the self he was trying to improve, and through that seeing, letting it fall away. So, when we engage in practices like meditation, it's not to become a better meditator or a more mindful person in the sense of accumulating skills. It's to cultivate the awareness that allows us to see the impermanent nature of our thoughts and feelings, to recognize the absence of a fixed self, and to allow the mistaken views to dissolve. The Buddha's teachings offer a path not to becoming a superior version of ourselves, but to realizing that we are already fundamentally free beyond the need for improvement. It is about uncovering, not constructing. To truly embrace this, we must let go of the idea that we need to modify ourself to be worthy of awakening. The truth of our being is not something we can add to or subtract from. It is something we can only uncover by seeing through the limitations we have imposed upon ourselves. But what does this look like in the messy reality of our lives, where past actions and identities seem so potent? In the next section, we will discover the simple truth that the present moment doesn't care who you were. The weight of the past often feels like an inescapable burden. Our history shapes our identity, influences our decisions, and colors our perception of the present. If we've made mistakes, if we've caused harm, if we've fallen short of our own expectations, we carry that baggage into every new experience, believing it defines our present and future potential. But the remarkable nature of the present moment is its utter indifference to our past. The now is a pristine space, unburdened by yesterday's triumphs or failures, today's intentions or tomorrow's anxieties. It simply is. It receives whatever arises within it, a thought, a sensation, an emotion, without judgment or attachment to what came before. Consider the monk in his practice. If he lingers on regrets from his past or boasts about his past spiritual discipline, he misses the present moment entirely. His mind is trapped in the echoes of what was, preventing him from truly engaging with what is. The present moment, however, offers him a fresh start, a clean slate, the opportunity to simply engage with whatever is arising right now. This indifference of the present moment is a source of immense liberation. It means that no matter how deeply we have stumbled, no matter who we have been, the opportunity to experience peace, clarity, and kindness is available to us right now. The past cannot stain the present moment, nor can it dictate its nature. Our personal narratives, built around our past experiences, create a strong sense of continuity. We believe that the me who made those mistakes yesterday is the same me facing this moment. While there is a conventional continuity, the ultimate reality is that each moment is a new arising, a fresh manifestation. The previous moment has already ceased to exist. This is why clinging to a past identity, whether it's the identity of a victim, a sinner, a hero, or even a dedicated practitioner, can be so limiting. These identities are built on memories, and memories are remnants of the past. The present moment, by contrast, is not built on memories, it is built on direct experience. When we are fully present, we are not reacting to our past. We are responding to what is actually happening. This allows for greater freedom and authenticity. We can act with clarity and wisdom, unclouded by the emotional residue of past events. The Buddha's teachings consistently point towards this present moment awareness. Mindfulness practice is essentially a training in returning to the now again and again, no matter what thoughts or feelings arise. It is a practice of surrendering the past and future to simply dwell in the immediacy of present experience. The present moment is also the only place where any genuine change or transformation can occur. You cannot change the past, and you cannot force the future, but in the present moment, you can choose how to respond, how to relate to your experience. You can choose to let go of old patterns, to open yourself to new possibilities, to act with kindness and compassion. This doesn't mean the past is irrelevant. Our experiences shape us, but the present moment offers us the unique power to engage with those experiences from a place of awareness, rather than being driven by their echoes. It allows us to acknowledge our history without being defined by it. The monk's path was ultimately about learning to inhabit the present moment fully. He discovered that true liberation was not found in erasing his past, but in living fully in the now, where the past held no power and the future was yet to be written. He realized that the present moment offered him a constant opportunity to be free, regardless of who he had been. This ability to step fresh into each moment, unburdened by the past, is a powerful gift. But if the present moment is so pure and unconditioned, how do we bridge the gap between merely observing it and truly connecting with it, especially when our habits pull us away? In the next section, we will explore detachment, not as coldness, but as clarity. The word detachment often carries a negative connotation, conjuring images of coldness, indifference, and a lack of empathy. We might imagine a detached person as someone who is unemotional, unfeeling, and unwilling to engage with the world or the people in it. This common misunderstanding creates a significant barrier to understanding a core principle of Buddhist practice. True detachment, as taught in the Dharma, is not about becoming emotionless or uncaring. It is about cultivating a clarity of perception that allows us to engage with life fully without being overwhelmed or ensnared by our attachments. It is the ability to experience the richness of life, its joys and its sorrows, its connections and its losses, without the constant suffering that arises from clinging. When we are attached, we grasp. We try to hold on to pleasant experiences, people, and even our sense of self, as if they were permanent possessions. This clinging creates a constant state of anxiety, because we know on some level that nothing is truly permanent and that loss is inevitable. We are constantly afraid of losing what we are attached to. The monk, in his spiritual journey, likely encountered this. He might have been attached to his spiritual progress, fearing he would lose his gains. Or he might have been attached to a certain ideal of detachment itself, creating a new form of clinging. This created a subtle internal suffering, a kind of emotional tension. Detachment, conversely, is about letting go of this grasping. It is the wisdom that understands the impermanent nature of all things and chooses not to build our happiness on foundations that are bound to shift. It allows us to appreciate things for what they are in the present moment, without trying to make them something they are not or something they cannot be. This clarity is not coldness. In fact, it often leads to a deeper, more authentic form of compassion. When we are not desperately clinging to our own sense of self or to specific outcomes, we are more open to the suffering of others. We can relate to their struggles without being driven by our own fears or desires. Imagine a doctor who is deeply attached to a patient's recovery. While well-intentioned, this attachment can lead to immense personal anguish if the patient does not improve. A detached doctor, however, approaches the situation with clarity and skill. They apply their knowledge and care with dedication, but without being emotionally crippled by the outcome. This allows them to remain effective and compassionate, even in the face of difficult realities. Detachment means recognizing that while we can act, we cannot ultimately control all outcomes. It means engaging with life with wisdom, effort, and care, but without the desperate need for things to be a certain way to maintain our own sense of well-being. It is the freedom to participate fully while understanding that we are not the arbitrate of permanence. When we practice detachment, we begin to see that our happiness does not depend on external circumstances or the continuous presence of pleasant experiences. We discover an inner wellspring of peace that is not shaken by the inevitable ups and downs of life. We can love deeply without possessiveness, and we can experience life fully without the constant fear of loss. The monk's true liberation came not from severing emotional ties, but from understanding the nature of his attachments and dissolving the grasping. He learned to engage with existence with an open heart and a clear mind, appreciating the flow of life without trying to dam it. This was not coldness, it was profound clarity and freedom. The clarity of detachment allows us to see things as they truly are, without the distortions of our desires and fears. But if this clarity is so liberating, why do we often resist it, clinging instead to familiar patterns of resistance? In the next section, we will explore how resistance to change is a form of control that keeps us bound. Change is the only constant, yet despite this undeniable truth, our minds are wired to resist it. We instinctively pull away from the unfamiliar, the uncomfortable, the disruptive. This resistance to change, this clinging to the status quo, is not just a passive reaction. It is an active attempt to control a reality that is inherently fluid. Think about the subtle ways we resist change. We might complain about minor inconveniences, engage in endless planning to avoid unexpected turns, or stubbornly hold onto old habits and beliefs, even when they are no longer serving us. Each act of resistance, no matter how small, is an effort to impose our will on the unpredictable flow of life, to maintain a semblance of control in a world that defies it. The monk, in his spiritual pursuit, would have encountered this resistance intensely. He might have resisted the dissolution of his old identity, the challenging nature of certain teachings, or the discomfort of sitting in silent meditation. Each instance of resistance was a mental battle, an attempt to dictate how things should be rather than accepting how they actually were. This resistance is fueled by our fear of the unknown. Change implies uncertainty. It means leaving behind what is familiar, even if it is painful, for the potential of something that is unknown, which could be even worse. The illusion of control, however false, offers a temporary sense of security. But this attempt to control change is ultimately futile and deeply unsatisfying. It is like trying to hold back a river with your bare hands. The more you resist, the more energy you expend, and the more frustrated and exhausted you become. This constant struggle against the natural current of life is a primary source of suffering. When we resist change, we also resist growth. Growth, by its very nature, involves transformation, movement, and often a shedding of the old. By clinging to the familiar, we prevent ourselves from evolving, from discovering new potentials, and from experiencing the richness that change can bring. The true path to peace does not lie in preventing change, but in learning to navigate it with wisdom and acceptance. It means understanding that change is not inherently good or bad, but simply the dynamic expression of existence. It means developing the flexibility and resilience to flow with life, rather than against it. This shift in perspective begins with recognizing our own patterns of resistance. When we feel the urge to push back against something new, to cling to something old, to complain or criticize, we can pause and ask ourselves, what am I trying to control here? Often, the answer will be the illusion of certainty or stability. By acknowledging this impulse to control, we can begin to loosen its hold. Instead of automatically resisting, we can try to approach the change with curiosity. What can I learn from this? How can I adapt? What opportunities might this bring? The monk's eventual breakthrough came when he stopped resisting the unfolding of his spiritual path and instead embraced it, trusting that the process itself, though often uncomfortable, was leading him towards a deeper truth. He learned that true freedom wasn't in controlling his experience, but in surrendering to its natural unfolding. This surrender is not passive resignation. It is an active engagement with reality, a willingness to adapt and learn. It is the realization that by letting go of our need to control, we gain a far greater freedom. We become like a skilled sailor who adjusts their sails to the wind, rather than a ship trying to sail against it. Our resistance to change is a deeply ingrained attempt to control our experience, but when we resist, we also resist deeper truths. If resistance is an illusion of control, why does pain feel so undeniably real, so personal? In the next section, we'll explore how pain is real, but my pain is an extra layer of suffering. Pain is an inherent part of the human experience. It arises from physical injury, loss, disappointment, and a myriad of other causes. It is a signal, a part of our biological and emotional functioning, that alerts us to harm or discomfort. This direct, visceral experience of pain is real, undeniable, and often unavoidable. However, we often add an extra layer to this pain, an amplifier that turns a universal experience into a personal torment. This extra layer is our narrative, our identification with the pain, the story we tell ourselves about my pain. It is the story of how this pain is unique, how unfair it is, how it defines us, and how it will never end. This is where suffering truly takes root. Consider the monk who experienced hardship on his spiritual path. If he suffered a physical ailment, the raw pain was real. But if he then added the narrative, "This is the worst pain any monk has ever endured. My body is too weak for this path. This suffering means I am failing," then the suffering became amplified. The simple fact of pain morphed into a profound personal tragedy. This "my pain" phenomenon is the ego's way of asserting its individuality, even in suffering. It's a desperate attempt to make sense of our experience by framing it as unique, as something that sets us apart. But this uniqueness, when attached to pain, only deepens our isolation and prolongs our agony. The Buddha taught that all conditioned phenomena are marked by suffering, dukkha. This universal suffering is an inherent quality of existence as long as we are bound by attachment and ignorance. So, in a sense, everyone experiences pain and suffering. The pain itself is part of the common human condition. The extra suffering comes from our conceptualization of it. We label it, we personalize it, we catastrophize it. This pain is happening to me. I am a victim of this pain is mine, and it will always be mine. These thoughts create a solid, enduring sense of self that is intrinsically linked to the painful experience. When we practice mindfulness, we learn to observe pain without immediately creating a story around it. We can acknowledge the physical sensation, the emotional sting, without getting lost in the narrative of my suffering. We observe it as a phenomenon that is arising and passing, rather than as a permanent fixture of our identity. This practice doesn't deny the reality of pain. It simply aims to separate the raw experience of pain from the conceptual suffering that we layer upon it. By reducing the we reduce the intensity of the suffering. The pain itself may still be unpleasant, but the sense of personal tragedy and helplessness diminishes. Moreover, this realization can foster a greater sense of connection with others. When we see that pain is a universal human experience, rather than a unique personal burden, we can relate to the suffering of others with greater empathy and compassion. We recognize that they too are experiencing the raw, yet often amplified, pain of existence. The monk's path encouraged him to see his own struggles as part of a larger human tapestry, rather than as personal failures. By letting go of the in his suffering, he found a space where the pain was still present, but the torment of personalized suffering began to dissolve. The distinction between the real experience of pain and the extra layer of suffering we add is a crucial insight. It allows us to face difficult experiences with greater resilience and less despair. It transforms our relationship with discomfort from one of personal victimhood to one of universal human experience. Recognizing that my pain is an added layer of suffering is powerful. But if we are to truly let go of that layer, what does this mean for the things we hold onto so tightly, believing they offer us stability? In the next section, we will confront the unavoidable truth. Nothing you cling to is stable. Clinging, it's a powerful word, isn't it? It conjures an image of tight fists, of desperately holding on, of a fierce refusal to let go. And that is precisely the nature of our attachment. We cling to people, to possessions, to ideas, to experiences, to our very sense of self, believing that in these things lies our security and happiness. But the universe, in its relentless unfolding, offers a simple, undeniable truth. Nothing you cling to is stable. Everything is in a constant state of flux, of arising and ceasing, of transformation. The very nature of existence is impermanence. To cling is to fight against the fundamental law of reality, and in that fight, we find only frustration and suffering. Imagine trying to hold a handful of sand. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips through your fingers. The same is true for our attachments. The more fiercely we cling to something, a relationship, a job, a fleeting moment of joy, the more intensely we feel its eventual passing. This clinging doesn't preserve what we cherish. It amplifies the pain of its inevitable departure. The monk, in his quest for enlightenment, likely encountered this with his spiritual practice. He might have clung to moments of deep peace, fearing they would vanish. He might have clung to his insights, believing they were ultimate truths to be grasped. He might have clung to the ideal of his own spiritual purity. Each of these clinging, however well-intentioned, was a source of subtle suffering, a resistance to the natural flow. When we cling, we attempt to freeze a moment in time, to make something permanent that is inherently transient. We build our hopes and our identity upon foundations that are like shifting sands. When the inevitable change occurs, and it always does, the structures we've built begin to crumble, and we are left bewildered and hurt. This instability doesn't mean life is without value or connection. It means that our appreciation for its preciousness should be heightened, not diminished. It means we can engage deeply, love fully, and strive wholeheartedly, but without the desperate need for permanence, without the assumption that these experiences will last forever. The freedom that comes from understanding this truth is profound. It allows us to engage with life more fully and more joyfully, because our happiness is no longer tethered to the precarious stability of external things. We can enjoy the warmth of the sun without demanding that it never set. We can cherish the presence of a loved one without expecting them to be by our side eternally. This realization isn't about becoming passive or apathetic. It's about aligning ourselves with the natural order of things. It's about recognizing that the very impermanence we fear is also what makes life dynamic, fresh, and ultimately meaningful. Without change, there would be no growth, no new experiences, no potential for deeper understanding. The monk's ultimate freedom came when he ceased trying to preserve his spiritual achievements and instead rested in the present moment, appreciating its fleeting beauty without clinging. He understood that the stability he sought was not in the things themselves, but in his ability to be present with them, whatever their form or duration. When we begin to loosen our grip, not out of despair, but out of wisdom, we find that what we thought we were losing was, in fact, a burden we were carrying. The emptiness that arises from letting go is not a void, but a space for a more profound and stable peace to emerge, one that is not dependent on the unstable nature of our attachments. The understanding that nothing we cling to is stable is a challenging insight, but it's a necessary one. It dismantles our illusions of security. But if these illusions fall away, what happens to the person we believe ourselves to be, the one who has been so carefully constructed? In the next section, we will explore the idea that the person you think you are might just be an echo. We navigate the world with a strong sense of self, a perceived individual who is the sum of their experiences, thoughts, and feelings. This person we believe ourselves to be feels solid, consistent, and unique. But what if this constructed persona is not the original melody, but merely an echo of past sounds, a reverberation of events that have long since passed? The idea that the person you think you are is an echo suggests that your identity is not a self-originating entity, but a response to external and internal stimuli. It's a collection of past voices, past experiences, past conditioning that continues to resonate within you, shaping your present responses. Consider the monk's journey. He had shed his former life, but the echoes of his past relationships, his social position, and his former beliefs continued to linger. His mind, seeking to create a coherent narrative, pieced these echoes together, forming a sense of continuity. The monk he saw himself as was an identity built upon the remnants of a past existence, a carefully curated echo. This echo isn't necessarily negative. It's simply the way our minds create a sense of order and continuity. We learn from our past, we remember our triumphs, and we carry the lessons from our mistakes. But the danger arises when we mistake this echo for the original sound, when we identify so completely with the reverberation that we believe it is the entirety of our existence. This identification with the echo leads to a rigid sense of self. We feel bound by our past actions, our past beliefs, our past pain. We think, I am this way because of what happened. While past events have undoubtedly shaped us, the echo is not the sound itself. The sound has ceased, and only the reverberation remains, and even that fades. The Buddha's teachings on no-self and impermanence point to this very idea. If the self is not permanent and unchanging, then the person we perceive must be a composite, a collection of fleeting phenomena. These phenomena arise and pass, leaving behind impressions, memories, and conditioned responses, the echoes. When we truly begin to understand this, it can be incredibly liberating. It means we are not irrevocably bound by our past. The echo has no inherent power of its own. Its resonance is dependent on the original sound, and the original sound has already faded. We are not condemned to repeat our past forever. This understanding empowers us to create new sounds, to generate different echoes. By practicing mindfulness and cultivating wisdom, we can choose to respond to the present moment with awareness, rather than being driven by the conditioned echoes of the past. We can choose to create new melodies, new resonances that are not solely dictated by what has been. It's like attending a concert. You hear the music, you feel its impact, and when it's over, the sound lingers in the air for a moment. But the beauty of music is that it can be played again, and a new performance, a new echo can arise. The power lies not in the lingering resonance, but in the ongoing creation of sound. The monk's realization was that he was not the echo of his former self, nor was he the echo of his current spiritual aspirations. He was the space in which these echoes arose and passed. He was the silence that allowed the music to be heard, and the silence that remained afterward. This was a profound freedom from the tyranny of the past. To see the person you think you are as an echo is to recognize that the original sound has already passed, and that you are not bound to endlessly repeat its reverberation. It opens the door to creating a new resonance, a living experience rather than a faded memory. The realization that our perceived self is an echo offers a path to freedom from the past. But true freedom also involves embracing the present. If we are not bound by the echo of the past, does this mean we should simply give up on our efforts, on our striving to be better in the present? In the next section, we will see that relaxing the self is not giving up. In our fast-paced, achievement-oriented world, the idea of relaxing the self can easily be misinterpreted as indolence, apathy, or a resignation to failure. We are taught that success comes from effort, from pushing harder, from striving relentlessly. So the notion of relaxing anything, especially our very sense of self, can sound like a recipe for mediocrity or even defeat. However, in the context of Buddhist wisdom, relaxing the self is not about giving up. It is about a profound shift in strategy, a realization that the relentless effort to maintain and perfect a fixed self is actually the source of our struggle. It is about releasing the tension of trying to be someone you are not, or someone you think you should be. Think of a tightly wound spring. It holds immense potential energy, but it's rigid and easily broken. If you were to slightly relax the winding, the spring wouldn't lose its potential. It would gain flexibility and resilience. It would be able to absorb shocks better and adapt to its surroundings. Similarly, when we relax the self, we don't lose our capacity, we gain a deeper, more authentic way of being. The monk who had been striving so hard for spiritual perfection encountered this. He was constantly trying to be a perfect monk, to achieve a certain state. This relentless effort created tension, anxiety, and a fear of any deviation from his perceived ideal. When he finally began to relax the self, to let go of the strenuous effort to control his spiritual progress, to simply be present with whatever arose, he found that his practice deepened and his peace grew. This relaxation doesn't mean abandoning our responsibilities or ceasing all effort. It means transforming the nature of our effort. Instead of striving to prove or improve a fixed self, our effort becomes directed towards cultivating awareness, compassion, and wisdom. The focus shifts from me achieving something to the natural unfolding of these qualities. When we relax the self, we stop trying to defend it, to portray it favorably, to ensure its constant success. We stop the exhausting internal dialogue of self-critique and self-praise. This frees up an immense amount of mental and emotional energy that can then be redirected towards more meaningful engagement with life. This giving up is not resignation, it is a strategic surrender. It is surrendering our attachment to a rigid identity, our need for constant control, and our fear of imperfection. By letting go of these burdens, we allow our true nature, which is already inherently peaceful and wise, to emerge. Consider learning to ride a bicycle. At first, you are rigid, tense, gripping the handlebars with all your might, terrified of falling. This tension actually makes it harder to balance. As you relax, becoming more fluid and adaptable, you find you can steer more easily, absorb bumps, and maintain your balance. Relaxing the self is akin to this, gaining fluidity and stability by releasing unnecessary tension. The essence of relaxing the self is not about ceasing to act or engage with the world. It is about acting from a place of openness and acceptance, rather than from a place of fear and striving. It is about allowing ourselves to be present, to be imperfect, and to trust the natural unfolding of life. This relaxed state allows for greater receptivity. When our minds are not constantly bracing themselves, they are more open to learning, to growth, and to experiencing joy. It is a state of dynamic ease, not of passive inertia. The monk who could finally relax the self wasn't giving up on his path. He was finally able to truly walk it, free from the self-imposed burden of striving. He realized that true progress came not from forcing himself, but from allowing himself to be present and open. The realization that relaxing the self is not giving up opens the door to a different kind of practice. But what if this practice involves a profound letting go, a kind of death even? In the next section, we will explore how meditation is a death practice. The word death often evokes fear, finality, and a sense of absolute ending. It is perhaps the most universally unsettling concept for beings who cling to the illusion of a permanent self. Yet in the profound wisdom traditions, particularly Buddhism, meditation is often described as a practice of dying. This is not a literal physical death, but a symbolic, transformative death of the ego, the false self that we cling to so desperately. Think about the monk committed to his meditation practice. Each session is an opportunity to confront the dissolution of his perceived self. As he sits, the thoughts, the memories, the emotions that constitute his everyday identity begin to surface and then, crucially, pass away. Each moment of mindful observation is a small death of a fleeting mental construct. The ego, the me that we identify with, is built on a foundation of permanence and control. It thrives on the illusion of continuity, of being a stable, independent entity. Meditation, by its very nature, challenges this illusion. It trains us to observe the impermanent, ever-changing nature of our thoughts, feelings, and sensations. Each thought that arises and is seen without our clinging to it is, in a sense, a small death of that thought's power over us. When we are deeply engrossed in our perceived self, we are alive in a particular way. We are alive with the fears, the desires, the judgments that define our personality. Meditation, by leading us into the spacious awareness beyond these constructs, can feel like a dissolution of that familiar aliveness. It's like a candle flame, so vibrant and present, gradually diminishing and disappearing into the vastness of the air. This death is not annihilation, it is purification. It is the dying away of the illusions, the self-imposed limitations, the egoic attachments that create our suffering. It is the shedding of layers of conditioning that obscure our true, luminous nature. The ego dies, but what emerges in its place is a vaster, more liberated awareness. The monk's practice involved sitting for long hours, observing the rise and fall of his internal landscape. Each moment of mindful awareness was a gentle dismantling of the rigid structures of his ego. He wasn't trying to build a better spiritual self, but rather to witness the dissolution of the self he thought he possessed. This dying was terrifying at times, but it was also the source of his deepest peace. The fear of this death can be intense. It triggers our primal fear of annihilation. We resist the dissolution of our familiar identity, even though that identity is the very source of our suffering. We hold onto the pain of our ego because it feels more real than the formless, unconditioned reality that lies beyond it. However, the death that meditation offers is not a loss, but a gain. It is the letting go of a burden, the shedding of armor. It is the return to a state of being that is not defined by clinging, by striving, or by a fixed identity. It is a return to our natural state, which is already whole and complete. To truly embrace meditation as a death practice is to approach it with courage and a willingness to let go. It is to understand that the ending of our egoic self is the beginning of our true liberation. It is to embrace the cessation of the constructed self as the pathway to boundless freedom. This practice of confronting the death of the ego is not an end in itself, but a radical form of purification. But what does this purification reveal? What is found when the ego finally ceases to demand attention? In the next section, we will explore how, when there is nothing missing except your own absence, true fulfillment is found. In our human condition, we often feel a pervasive sense of lack. We believe something is missing. Perhaps it's happiness, or purpose, or love, or peace. We spend our lives striving, searching, acquiring, trying to fill this perceived void, believing that once we find what is missing, we will finally be complete. But what if the premise itself is flawed? What if, in our relentless pursuit of what is missing, we are overlooking the fundamental truth that nothing is actually missing, except perhaps our own present, unadulterated absence from the experience? Consider the monk in his secluded practice. He might have felt that enlightenment was missing, that profound peace was missing, that a true connection to the divine was missing. He dedicated himself to practices, seeking to obtain these things, to fill the perceived void within him. But the deeper he delved, the more he began to see that the missing elements were not external objects to be found, but simply the result of his own absence from the present moment. Your absence from the present moment is a state of being preoccupied. It's when your mind is lost in the past, dwelling on regrets or nostalgia, or lost in the future, planning, worrying, or fantasizing. In these states, you are not fully present to what is actually happening, to the richness and completeness of the moment itself. And in this absence, you create a sense of lack. The present moment, when truly experienced, is not lacking. It contains everything. It is the ground of all existence. It is the space where life unfolds. But because we are often not fully present at this moment, we feel a deficiency. We are not fully inhabiting our own being. The feeling of missing out is born from this disengagement, this continuous mental wandering. It's like being in a beautiful garden, but having your eyes closed, convinced that you are in a barren wasteland. The garden is there, fertile and complete, but your absence from it prevents you from experiencing its abundance. The practice of mindfulness is, at its core, a practice of returning to presence. It is about gently redirecting your attention, again and again, to the direct experience of this moment. As you become more present, you begin to realize that the world is not lacking, and more importantly, that your own being is not lacking. When you are fully present, you are not seeking something to fill a void. You are simply experiencing, and in that experience, you find that the richness you were searching for was already there, obscured by your own mental absence. The monk's final insight was not about acquiring some new spiritual attribute, but about realizing that the peace he sought was not something to be gained, but something to be uncovered by being present in his own unfolding experience. The missing elements were merely the result of his own mental flight from the present. This is a radical recalibration of our understanding of fulfillment. It suggests that the answer to our sense of lack is not in acquiring more or becoming more, but in simply being more present. It is in the fullness of our own embodied, conscious presence that we discover that nothing is truly missing. The absence we feel is not an absence of external things, but an absence of our own conscious engagement with the reality that is already complete. The moment we return to ourselves, the moment we are truly present, the illusion of lack dissolves. This realization is the foundation for true contentment. It's not about accepting a lack, but about recognizing the inherent fullness of existence when we are fully here. But if nothing is missing within ourselves, what does this mean for the deep-seated feeling that we are not enough, and how do we move beyond it? In the next section, we'll explore moving beyond this feeling and simply learning to be. For many of us, life feels like a perpetual effort to prove our worth, to feel enough. We chase achievement, seek validation, and constantly measure ourselves against idealized versions of what we should be. This relentless striving to feel enough is exhausting and paradoxically keeps us from ever truly feeling that way. The fundamental problem with trying to feel enough is that it implies we are currently not enough. It sets up a chase, a goal that is perpetually out of reach because it's based on a faulty premise. We believe that if we could just acquire that next thing, achieve that next milestone, or become that next version of ourselves, then, and only then, would we finally feel adequate. The monk spent years grappling with this. He strove for spiritual perfection, believing that enlightenment was the ultimate attainment that would make him enough. He analyzed his every thought, judged his every action, trying to engineer himself into a state of spiritual sufficiency. But the more he tried, the more he felt lacking, as if he were constantly falling short of some invisible standard. The Buddha's teachings offer a radical alternative. Stop trying to feel enough and simply be. This is not about resignation or complacency. It is about a profound shift in perspective. It is about recognizing that your inherent worth is not conditional on your achievements, your status, or your perceived flaws. Your worth is simply your being. When you stop trying to feel enough, you are no longer engaged in a battle with yourself. You are not constantly judging your current state against a future, perfected ideal. Instead, you can rest in the reality of who you are right now, in this moment. This doesn't mean you stop growing or learning, but the motivation for that growth changes. It comes from a place of abundance, not from a place of lack. This is not about accepting mediocrity. It is about recognizing that your fundamental being is not flawed and in need of improvement to be worthy. The you that exists right now, in its raw, unedited form, is already complete. The feeling of not being enough is an illusion, a construct of the mind that can be seen through. Consider a flower. Does a rose try to feel beautiful enough? Does it strive to be a more perfect rose? No, it simply is a rose, unfolding its petals and releasing its fragrance. Its beauty is not something it achieves, it is its very nature. In the same way, our inherent worth is our nature, not something we must earn. The path is not about acquiring a new feeling of enoughness. It is about letting go of the belief that you are not enough in the first place. It is about recognizing that the striving for more is itself the source of the feeling of lack. When you cease the effort to feel enough, you open yourself to experience the inherent sufficiency that is already present. This is not a passive state, but an active presence. You are fully engaged with life, not from a place of desperate need, but from a place of relaxed awareness and gratitude. The monk's realization was that enlightenment was not some future state he had to earn to feel enough. It was the recognition that he already was, in his essence, fully and completely. The striving had been the only thing that made him feel otherwise. By letting go of the striving, he could simply be. This shift from trying to feel enough to simply being is a profound journey, but it begins with a simple decision. To stop the chase and to rest in the present reality of your own being. It is the beginning of true peace, not earned, but recognized. But if the journey is about recognizing our inherent sufficiency, it implies a process of unlearning, of shedding the layers of false beliefs. In the next section, we will explore how unlearning is the true path. We often think of learning as acquiring new knowledge, accumulating new skills, and adding to our existing understanding. We are conditioned to believe that progress lies in expansion, in collecting more information and refining existing abilities. However, in the context of spiritual awakening, the path often involves a profound process of unlearning. Unlearning is not about forgetting or becoming ignorant. It is about dismantling the false beliefs, the ingrained conditioning, and the conceptual frameworks that have obscured our true nature. It is about recognizing that much of what we have learned has, in fact, created the very limitations and suffering we experience. Think of a vessel that is already full of stagnant water. No matter how much fresh, clean water you try to pour into it, none will enter. To receive the new, the old must be emptied. Similarly, our minds are often filled with outdated beliefs, rigid opinions, and egoic identities. To truly learn and grow, we must first unlearn what is no longer serving us. The monk, dedicated to spiritual practice, would have found that his most significant breakthroughs came not from learning new doctrines, but from unlearning his deeply ingrained habits of thought, his attachments, and his identification with a fixed self. He had to unlearn his belief in a permanent me, his craving for certain spiritual states, and his fear of dissolution. This process is often challenging because our learned patterns feel so deeply ingrained and true. We have built our sense of identity and security around them. To question or abandon them can feel like dismantling the very foundations of our existence. It requires courage to confront the possibility that what we hold dear might actually be a hindrance. Buddhist practice, at its heart, is a process of deconstruction. It encourages us to look critically at our assumptions about ourselves and the world. Through practices like mindfulness and contemplation, we begin to see the conditioned nature of our thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. We begin to unlearn the habitual reactions that create our suffering. For example, we learn that our interpretations of events are not objective truths, but mental constructions. We unlearn the habit of automatically believing every thought that arises. We begin to unlearn the idea that happiness is something to be found out there, and instead recognize its potential within. This process is not about erasing your past or discarding your experiences. It is about discerning what is true and what is merely learned conditioning. It is about clearing away the mental clutter that prevents us from recognizing our inherent wisdom and peace. The Buddha himself did not present new information as much as he pointed towards a reality that was already present, obscured by layers of misapprehension. His teachings were often described as a raft to cross the river of suffering. Once you reach the other shore, you don't carry the raft with you, you leave it behind. This is the essence of unlearning. The path of unlearning requires patience, diligence, and a willingness to embrace uncertainty. It can feel like a dismantling, a breaking down, but it is in this dissolution that the true structure of our being can finally emerge, unburdened by the weight of false learning. The monk who finally found peace understood that his spiritual journey was not about adding more layers of knowledge, but about carefully peeling away the layers of learned ignorance that had been obscuring his natural clarity. He realized that unlearning was the true path to wisdom. As we unlearn the habits that create suffering, we move towards a different kind of experience. But what does this clarity feel like, and how do we know when we are truly experiencing it? In the next section, we will explore how clarity isn't a feeling, but a return. We often associate clarity with a bright, uplifting feeling, a sense of sudden understanding, a moment of joy, or a rush of insight. We might describe a good decision as feeling clear, or a moment of understanding as being crystal clear. While these feelings can accompany moments of clarity, the true nature of clarity, as understood in spiritual traditions, is far more fundamental. Clarity in its deepest sense is not a fleeting emotional state, but a return to our natural, unclouded state of being. It is the cessation of the mental fog, the emotional turbulence, and the egoic distortions that obscure our perception of reality. It is not something we gain, but something that is revealed when the obscurations are removed. Think of a pure, still lake whose surface is being constantly rippled by wind and debris. The underlying clarity of the water is always there, but the surface disturbance prevents us from seeing it. The practice of meditation and mindfulness is like calming the wind and clearing away the debris. As the surface settles, the inherent clarity of the water becomes apparent. The monk, in his dedicated practice, would have experienced moments that felt like bright insights, like flashes of understanding. But he would also have learned that these were not the true nature of clarity. True clarity was the quiet, unwavering space that remained when the mental storms subsided, the space in which the ripples of thought and emotion could arise and pass without disturbing its underlying stillness. This return to clarity is not about feeling good, it is about seeing accurately. It is about perceiving reality as it is, uncolored by our personal biases, fears, and desires. It is a state of direct perception, free from the filters of the conditioned mind. When we mistake clarity for a feeling, we create a new attachment. We start chasing after the feeling of clarity, and when it inevitably fades, we feel a sense of loss, as if we have lost our way. True clarity, on the other hand, is stable because it is not a dependent state. It is our fundamental nature. This return to clarity means that we are no longer caught in the dramas of our own minds. We can observe our thoughts and emotions without being swept away by them. We can engage with life's challenges with a steady, grounded perspective, because our inner world is no longer a chaotic storm. The monks did not seek to create clarity, but to reveal it by ceasing to obscure it. Their practices were designed to still the mind, to quiet the inner chatter, and to allow the natural luminosity of awareness to shine through. This is not a process of self-improvement, but of self-recognition. When we recognize this inherent clarity, it doesn't mean we suddenly become emotionless or detached from life. It means we can experience all aspects of life, joy, sorrow, anger, peace, without our sense of self being fundamentally shaken. We can be moved by life, but not overwhelmed by it. The path to clarity is a process of uncovering. It is the gradual realization that the peace and wisdom we seek are not external acquisitions, but are already present within us, waiting to be recognized. It is a return to our essential nature, a nature that is inherently clear, open, and radiant. This clarity, this return to our true nature, is the foundation for genuine peace. But if we are so quick to embrace our own suffering and limitations, how does this clarity manifest in relation to others? In the next section, we will explore how compassion is not a practiced virtue, but the opposite of self-clinging. Compassion is often viewed as a virtue to be cultivated, a noble emotion to strive for, or a conscious effort to be kind to others. While these aspects are certainly part of it, the deepest understanding of compassion in Buddhist wisdom reveals something more fundamental. Compassion is not an action or a feeling we cultivate, but the natural expression of a mind that has begun to loosen its self-clinging. When we are deeply attached to our own sense of self, to our needs, our desires, our fears, our narrative, our focus is necessarily inward. We are preoccupied with protecting, enhancing, and validating this me. While we may perform acts of kindness, they can often be tinged with an underlying motivation centered on how it makes us look, or how it benefits our own sense of goodness. This is still a form of self-focus. The monk, in his dedicated practice, discovered this subtle truth. He realized that his attempts to feel compassion were often just another form of self-concern, wanting to be a good, compassionate monk. True compassion, he found, arose not when he tried to generate feelings of kindness, but when his grip on his own separate, isolated self began to loosen. As the illusion of a solid, fixed self dissolves, the artificial boundary between self and other begins to blur. When we see that we are all interconnected, that our experiences of joy and suffering are not so different, then the suffering of another naturally resonates within us. This resonance is not an intellectual effort. It is an inherent response of a mind that is no longer confined by egoic boundaries. Compassion, then, is not an addition to our being, but an expression of our innate interconnectedness. It is the natural outpouring of a heart that is no longer primarily concerned with its own small, separate existence. It is the opposite of self-clinging, because self-clinging is the very thing that creates the illusion of separation and isolation, which then breeds indifference or a self-centered kindness. When we are not desperately trying to hold ourselves together, when we are not rigidly defending our own territory, we naturally become more open to the experiences of others. Their joy touches us, and their suffering moves us, not as an abstract concept, but as a direct reflection of our own potential for both. This understanding doesn't diminish the importance of intentional acts of kindness, but it reframes the motivation behind them. When compassion arises from a place of reduced self-clinging, our actions are more authentic, more selfless, and therefore more effective. We are not doing it for ourselves, but because it is the natural response of an awakened heart. The monk's journey involved a gradual unraveling of his egoic self. As this happened, a deep, pervasive sense of care and concern for all beings arose spontaneously. It wasn't something he manufactured. It was the natural radiance of a mind that had seen through the illusion of separation. The practice, then, is to gently observe and loosen our self-clinging. As we do this, it's not about forcing ourselves to feel compassionate. It's about trusting that as our own self-centeredness diminishes, compassion will naturally arise, like a flower blooming when the conditions are right. It is the opposite of grasping. It is the freedom that comes from letting go. Recognizing that compassion arises from the loosening of self-clinging is a powerful insight. But if our deepest anxieties are often rooted in this self-clinging, how do we distinguish them from genuine concerns? In the next section, we will explore how most anxiety is ego in disguise. Anxiety is a familiar, often unwelcome, companion for many. It manifests as a gnawing worry, a racing heart, a relentless stream of what-if scenarios. We often believe that this anxiety is a rational response to threats in our environment or potential dangers in the future. However, a deeper examination reveals that a significant portion of our anxiety is not about genuine threats, but about the ego's desperate attempts to protect itself. The ego, that constructed sense of self we cling to, is inherently insecure. It thrives on certainty, control, and the validation of its own existence and superiority. When the ego perceives any threat to its stability, whether it's social disapproval, failure, loss, or even simply the prospect of change, it mobilizes its defenses, and anxiety is often one of its primary weapons. Think of the monk who was devoted to his spiritual path. He might have experienced anxiety about not meditating perfectly, about not attaining enlightenment quickly enough, or about being judged by other monks. These anxieties, while seemingly related to his spiritual goals, were often driven by the ego's fear of failing to live up to an ideal, of not being a good enough monk, of having its spiritual identity challenged. This egoic anxiety is not about survival in the physical sense. It is about the survival of the egoic identity. It's the fear that the narrative we've built around ourselves will be exposed as false, or that we will lose our status, our control, or our sense of significance. The mind, driven by ego, is constantly seeking to predict and control the future to ensure its own safety and perpetuation. When it cannot guarantee a favorable outcome, or when it foresees potential threats to its carefully constructed image, it generates anxiety. This serves as a mental alarm system, constantly on alert for imagined dangers that primarily threaten the ego's fragile existence. This anxiety often manifests as obsessive thinking, a loop of worries that never leads to resolution. The ego is not actually seeking solutions to real problems. It is seeking to maintain its sense of self-importance by engaging in these fearful scenarios. It is a form of self-preoccupation disguised as concern. When we can recognize our anxiety as ego in disguise, it begins to lose its power. Instead of being consumed by fearful thoughts, we can observe them with a degree of detachment. We can ask, is this a real threat to my physical well-being, or is this my ego's fear of losing its footing? This simple inquiry can create space and perspective. The path of mindfulness and self-inquiry helps us to disentangle our true sense of being from the ego's anxious projections. As we become more grounded in the present moment and less identified with the ego's narrative, the fuel for egoic anxiety diminishes. The monk's breakthrough eventually came when he stopped trying to control his spiritual state and in doing so, diminished his ego's anxiety. He realized that his striving to be a certain kind of monk, his fear of failure, was all ego-driven. By letting go of that striving and simply being present to his practice, the anxiety began to recede, replaced by a calm understanding. Most anxiety is not a practical warning system. It is the ego's desperate cry for control and security disguised as concern. Recognizing this is the first step toward disarming its power and finding true peace. The understanding that most anxiety is ego in disguise is a profound step towards freedom. But if liberation is the goal, what is the nature of that ultimate freedom and how is it achieved? In the next section, we will explore how enlightenment isn't adding light, but removing veils. The term enlightenment often conjures images of a radiant being, bathed in a divine glow, possessing an abundance of wisdom and virtue. It's easy to imagine enlightenment as something we acquire, like earning a new credential or attaining a higher state of being, a process of adding something to ourselves, perhaps more wisdom, more peace, or more awareness. However, the Buddha's teachings present a different perspective. Enlightenment is not about acquiring something new, but about realizing what is already inherently present. It is not about adding light, but about removing the veils that obscure the light that is already there. Think of a clear sky. The sun is always shining, its light ever present, but if there are clouds covering the sky, we don't see the sun. The clouds are not blocking the light from reaching the earth, they are simply obscuring our view of it. Enlightenment, in this sense, is the shedding of those clouds, allowing us to see the sun, our true nature, as it always was. The monk, in his spiritual journey, might have initially approached enlightenment as a goal to be achieved, a state to be attained. He might have imagined that through intense practice, he would gain enlightenment. But the deeper wisdom he uncovered was that enlightenment was not an addition, but a realization. It was the recognition that the luminosity of consciousness, the wisdom and compassion that seemed distant, were already his true nature, obscured by the clouds of his ignorance, his attachments, and his egoic conditioning. The veils that obscure our natural brilliance are manifold. The veils of desire, aversion, ignorance, pride, doubt, and the fundamental misconception of a fixed self. These are not external forces acting upon us, but misconceptions and habits of mind that we have cultivated. Enlightenment is the process of seeing through these veils, one by one. When we try to add to ourselves, we are essentially reinforcing the ego, the very structure we are seeking to transcend. We are still operating from the premise that I need to become something more. Enlightenment, however, is the realization that I, in the sense of a separate, permanent self, is an illusion. The light that is revealed is the boundless, unconditioned awareness that exists beyond this illusory self. This unlearning of our ingrained illusions is what allows the inherent light to shine through. It is a process of purification, not of acquisition. It is like polishing a dusty mirror. The polish doesn't add reflection to the mirror, it removes the grime so that the mirror's innate reflective capacity can be seen. The monk who eventually found liberation was not a different person from who he was before. He was the same awareness, but now free from the obscuring veils of his own mind. He realized that the wisdom he sought was not something he had acquired, but something he had always possessed, like the sun behind the clouds. Enlightenment, therefore, is not a reward for diligent practice, but the natural consequence of seeing through the illusions that prevent us from recognizing our true nature. It is the cessation of the veils, allowing the ever-present light of our being to shine forth, unhindered and complete. The journey to enlightenment is not about becoming someone new, but about recognizing who you already are, stripped bare of the illusions you have carried. But what does this profound realization mean for our sense of self and for our experience of loss. In the next section, we will explore a radical implication. If there is no self, then nothing can be taken away. This is perhaps one of the most profound, and for many, unsettling implications of the Buddhist understanding of no self. If there is no permanent, independent, unchanging self, then who or what is it that can suffer loss? If I am not a fixed entity, then how can anything truly be taken away from me? The monk, in his spiritual development, wrestled with this. He had renounced possessions, family, and his former life. He had experienced loss. But as he deepened his understanding of no self, he began to see that the pain of loss stemmed not from the loss itself, but from his identification with a self that he believed was diminished by that loss. When we believe we have a solid, enduring self, then any perceived threat to that self, be it the loss of a loved one, a job, a possession, or even our good health, feels like a personal devastation. It feels like a part of me is gone, leaving a void, a diminishment. This is where suffering arises. However, if we truly grasp the concept of no self, then the foundation for this sense of personal loss crumbles. If there is no inherent, solid me to begin with, then what exactly is being taken away? This doesn't mean that painful experiences cease to occur. Loss, sickness, and hardship are still part of the human condition. But the suffering associated with these experiences is radically altered. Without the solid sense of me to cling to and defend, the pain becomes an event that happens rather than a personal disaster. Imagine a ripple on the surface of a vast ocean. The ripple appears, moves, and then dissolves back into the ocean. Was the ripple truly lost when it dissolved, or did it simply return to its source, becoming one with the whole again? If we see ourselves not as isolated ripples, but as the ocean itself, then any apparent loss is simply a transformation within the boundless expanse. This understanding is not about becoming cold or indifferent. It's about recognizing that the clinging to a separate self creates the vulnerability to suffering. When that clinging is released, the experience of loss can be met with a profound sense of acceptance and even peace. The monk who had truly internalized the teaching of no self was not immune to sadness when faced with impermanent situations. But his sadness was different. It was not a desperate clinging to what was gone, but a gentle acknowledgement of its passing, a recognition of the natural flow of existence, all within the boundless expanse of his own being. There was sorrow for the impermanent nature of things, but not the torturous suffering of personal loss. If there is no self, then there is no inherent possession, no inherent ownership. What we perceive as mine is simply a temporary manifestation, a configuration of causes and conditions that will inevitably change. When this understanding takes root, the fear of loss diminishes and a great freedom emerges. This realization can be challenging because our entire life experience is often built around the concept of a personal self. But the profound liberation it offers is the freedom from the very fear of loss that plagues so many of us. If nothing can truly be taken away because there is no inherent self to possess, then what is the ultimate boundary to our freedom? In the next section, we will explore the final freedom, which involves letting go of even freedom itself. This might sound paradoxical, even contradictory. We seek freedom, we strive for liberation, and then the teaching is to let go of freedom itself. This is the essence of the most subtle and profound teachings, where the limitations of our conceptual understanding are pushed to their absolute limit. Human beings, even on a spiritual path, tend to grasp at freedom. We see it as a desirable state, a precious attainment, something to be held onto fiercely. We might define our freedom as being free from certain things. Free from suffering, free from attachments, free from ego. And in this very act of defining and holding onto freedom, we create a new form of clinging, a subtler egoic identity, the identity of the free person. The monk who had realized many profound truths still found himself grappling with this subtle grasping. He had let go of his ego, his attachments, his fears. He had achieved a remarkable degree of liberation. Yet he could still be aware of his freedom, proud of his attainment, and fearful of losing it. This awareness of his freedom was, in itself, a form of subtle self-clinging, a subtle egoic identity. The final freedom, as taught by some advanced traditions, is the freedom from the very concept and pursuit of freedom itself. It is to rest in a state where the dualistic mind, the mind that separates into bound and free, finally dissolves. It is to be so utterly present, so completely beyond the conceptual framework of self, that the idea of being free or being bound simply loses its meaning. This is not about returning to bondage or accepting suffering. It is about realizing that the ultimate reality is beyond these dualistic distinctions. It is a state of being that is so complete, so undifferentiated, that the need to label it as free becomes unnecessary and even limiting. When we are attached to the idea of our own freedom, we are still operating from a conceptual framework where a self exists that is either free or not free. The final liberation is to transcend this very framework. It is to be so fully integrated with the nature of reality that the quest for freedom has simply vanished, like a dream upon waking. This is often described as the ultimate letting go. It is not just letting go of our possessions, our identities, or our desires, but letting go of the very idea of letting go in pursuit of freedom. It is a state of effortless being, where the mind is no longer striving, no longer seeking, because it has realized that all that is already complete. The monk who finally understood this was no longer striving to be free. He simply was. The concept of freedom, the pursuit of it, the awareness of it, all had dissolved into the seamless reality of his being. It was a freedom that needed no name, no definition, no holding on. This final freedom is not a goal to be attained through practice, but a realization that dawns when all other forms of grasping have been relinquished, including the grasping of freedom itself. It is the ultimate surrender, where the illusion of the separate self and its pursuit of liberation finally ceases to be. But what if this ultimate surrender feels less like freedom and more like a collapse, a loss of ground? In the next section, we will explore how this resting is found in the truth that needed nothing from you. After the arduous journey of unlearning, of dismantling illusions, of confronting the vastness of emptiness and the subtle grasps of freedom itself, there is a profound realization. It is the realization that the ultimate truth, the fundamental nature of reality, never demanded anything from you. We often embark on spiritual paths with a sense of obligation or a feeling that we must earn our peace, our wisdom, or our liberation. We believe that if we try hard enough, if we practice diligently enough, if we become good enough, then we will finally qualify for this truth, for this peace. But the truth, in its purest form, is not something to be earned or achieved. It simply is. The monk, after years of rigorous practice, might have felt that enlightenment was a reward for his efforts. He might have felt a sense of accomplishment, of having earned his peace. But the ultimate truth he uncovered was that the peace he experienced was not a prize, but a revelation of what was already present, a natural state that was not dependent on his striving. The truth of existence, its impermanence, its interconnectedness, its emptiness, is not a judgment. It does not require you to be worthy or prepared or special. It simply is the way things are. When we finally stop struggling against this truth, when we stop trying to force ourselves into a preconceived mold, we can finally rest in it. This rest is not a passive giving up, but an active surrender. It is the surrender of our ego's desperate need to control, to achieve, to define itself. It is the release of the constant striving that has kept us in a state of perpetual disquiet. When we stop demanding that reality conform to our expectations, and when we stop demanding that we conform to some idealized version of ourselves, we find a profound peace. This truth needed nothing from you to exist. The sun shines whether you acknowledge it or not. The river flows regardless of your approval. Your own true nature, luminous and free, exists regardless of your efforts to attain it. The exhaustion we feel often comes from the constant effort to be something other than what we are, to achieve a truth that is already here. When this realization dawns, it is like coming home. The frantic searching ceases, the striving ends. There is a simple, profound peace in recognizing that you were never separate from this truth, and that it asked nothing of you. You are already part of it, woven into its fabric. The monk's final peace came not from an ultimate spiritual attainment, but from understanding that the truth he sought had never been a goal to be reached, but a reality to be recognized. And in that recognition, he found a rest that required no effort, no striving, and no qualification. It was simply the truth that had always been, needing nothing from him but his simple, open presence. This rest is the ultimate freedom. It is the freedom from the burden of self, from the illusion of separation, and from the endless pursuit of an unattainable ideal. It is the profound peace that arises when we finally realize that the truth needs nothing from us and that we have always already been enough. Make sure to subscribe for more Buddhist wisdom and hit that notification bell so you never miss the next teaching. Until then, stay present, stay peaceful, and we'll see you in the next one.